Y'all, they just brought back segregation like black people give a fuck. I didn't want to go to Mima and Peepaw's funky ass, racist ass, non-seasoned ass restaurant anyway. I don't give a fuck. The food is nasty. Now what? Put the sign up, ho.
If you're confused about what's going on with Trump's executive order on segregation, let me explain. Although Trump did sign an executive order to remove a prior ban on segregation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still in place, which means it is still illegal to segregate a protected class. However, the reason this is such a huge deal is because the federal government is in charge of enforcing the Civil Rights Act and investigating civil rights violations. By Trump signing this executive order, he is making it loud and clear that the federal government does not intend to do their part in enforcement or investigation. Effectively, what he's done is made it known to businesses that they don't need to abide by the Civil Rights Act because the government won't enforce it. Several federal agencies, like the Department of Homeland Security and the National Institute of Health, have already begun issuing notices to employees advising them not to consider the prior ban on segregation going forward. While this is only one of the countless attacks on DEI that Trump has made, the potential impacts of this order are vast and frightening, especially considering the history our country has with segregation.
All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh, Bahashim, Rakakwadash. I want to give double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, and grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. This is your fellow servant, Rokoyer from the GMS Orlando camp, coming at you with the news and prophecy. All right, we have some more interesting developments here after the Passover. All right, the Lord is starting to increase the division and racial tension here in America, Babylon the Great. All right, and it's all according to prophecy. All right, now if you've been paying attention this week, there have been some heavy talks of segregation coming back into play, all right, under this new law that Trump has passed. All right, which, like everything else, is not really what people are making it out to be. But nevertheless, it's a step toward the prophecy being fulfilled, all right, of sedition, race wars, and so on and so forth. All right, it's a step toward the prophecy being fulfilled. All right. And the reason why I put the videos at the beginning of this lesson is because it shows the spirit, all right, that people are in, all right, especially Israelites. All right, it shows the spirit, all right, that Jake is in, all right, with this whole talk of segregation being put back into play. All right, Jake is all for it. All right, and it's prophesied that Judah shall be roused up. All right, and Judah is being roused up here in these latter days. At one point in time, they were a crouched lion. All right, they were docile. You know, they were dormant. But now the Lord is starting to stir up that spirit amongst the nation of Israel, all right, to come against our enemies. All right, our chief enemy, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. You know, and Jake ain't going for that same old Martin Lucifer the Queen doctrine anymore, man. They're ready to separate. For the most part, they're ready to separate, as you've seen in a couple of videos that played before this. All right, and that's the spirit, and that's the spirit that the Lord is stirring up here in Babylon, man. That spirit of division. All right, that spirit of separation. You know what I'm saying? For 2/3 of our people, you know, they still going to maintain and cleave unto the ways of Esau, even the so-called white man. But for the remnant, all right, that spirit of separation, that spirit of dividing, separating from mentally, spiritually, you know, from the enemy, all right, is coming up in the earth, man. You know? But I have this article here from NPR.org, and it says, segregated facilities are no longer explicitly banned in federal contracts. Now we're going to read some of this to get, you know, a better understanding of exactly what's going on with this whole segregation law, because it's not exactly what people are making it out to be. But once again, nevertheless, it's a step toward the prophecy being fulfilled. All right, before we read that, actually, we're going to get this here in Isaiah 19 and verse 14. It says, the Lord have mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggereth in his vomit. All right, and the Lord has mingled a very perverse spirit here in America, Babylon the Great. All right, Egypt. Okay, America's modern day Egypt. Okay, and the Lord has mixed a very perverse spirit in the midst of this place. All right, and now we're starting to see, people divided. Families are divided. All right, households are divided. Friends are divided. Peoples are divided. All right, and then that division is starting to increase more and more and more as the days go by. And then as the scriptures say here in Matthew the 12th chapter, all right, in the 25th verse, it says, Yahweh knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. All right, so with that division being made greater and greater, that's spelling the end of this kingdom. All right, because the Lord said every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. All right, and we're starting to see that divide widen and widen and widen. And really these devils were divided going back to the Greek and Roman Empire. Ever since they came up with that plebeians and patricians, that old democratic republican system called plebeians and patricians. All right, they were divided since that time. Hey, they were divided since the time of Alexander the Freak. All right, when their 4 generals took over after Alexander died, and they started killing each other for the power. They were divided then. All right, and now that they have all nations, all tongues under one banner, they're divided even more. They're divided even more. And we're starting to see that division bring their kingdom down piece by piece. But it says, after a recent change by the Trump administration, the federal government no longer explicitly prohibits contractors from having segregated restaurants, waiting rooms, and drinking fountains. A segregation clause is one of several identified in a public memo issued by the General Service Administration last month. Affecting all civil federal agencies, the memo explains that it is making changes prompted by President Trump's executive order on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which repealed an executive order signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. All right, now this whole uproar started from this DEI conversation. All right, Trump taking away DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which put a lot of jakes in the uproar because they believed that it affected them, when in reality, it affected so-called white women the most. That's why the law was put in place in the first place, to give so-called white women a working chance, so to speak, when it comes to finding jobs, upholding and keeping jobs, in the American system. That's why it was set in place, but a lot of jakes don't know, a lot of jakes aren't, don't educate themselves on what's going on, so they cause an uproar over things that they don't even know what's going on, which is a beautiful thing, because amongst those uproars, all right, as Trump has taken away the DEI, all right, you have boycotts, all right, that have started, all right, as a result. Okay, it says, as of March 21st, 2025, there are ongoing and planned boycotts targeting companies like Target, Walmart, Amazon, and Nestle, primarily due to concerns about DEI initiatives, corporate policies, and perceived unethical practices. All right, it says a 40-day boycott of Target starting on March 5th, Walmart for April 7th to 14th, Amazon March 7th to 14th, and so on and so forth, Nestle, General Mills, and other companies, which is a part of that perverse spirit that's being mingled in the midst of Egypt. All right, people are in an uproar. People are disgruntled. All right, and people are starting to turn against, these facilities that have been regarded or upheld in high regard for years now. It's a jackrabbit crossing across my car right now. It's a spirit. People are starting to come against these different facilities and governments and agencies and peoples. All right. But it says back in this article, while there are still state and federal laws that outlaw segregation and discrimination that companies need to comply with, legal experts say that this change to contracts across the federal government is significant. It's symbolic, but it's incredibly meaningful in its symbolism, says Melissa Murray, a constitutional law professor at New York University. These provisions that require federal contractors to adhere to and comply with federal civil rights laws and maintain integrated rather than segregated workplaces were all part of the federal government's efforts to facilitate the settlement that led to integration in the 1950s and 60s. The fact that they are now excluding those provisions from the requirements for federal contractors, I think, speaks volumes. The clause in question is the Federal Acquisition Regulation, known as the FAR, a huge document used by agencies to write contracts for anyone providing goods or services to the federal government. Clause 52.222.1.2, whatever. Prohibition of segregated facilities reads, the contractor agrees that it does not and will not maintain or provide for its employees any segregated facilities at any of its establishments, and that it does not and will not permit its employees to perform their services at any location under its control where segregated facilities are maintained. Let's jump down. The current version of the clause, last updated in 2015, defines segregated facilities as work areas, restaurants, drinking fountains, transportation, housing, and more. It says you can't segregate based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and national origin. Let's jump down. It says, to be clear, all businesses, those that have government contracts and those that do not, still need to follow federal and state laws, including Civil Rights Act of 1964, which makes segregated facilities illegal. All right, so it's not segregation is not back into place, so to speak, but it was a step toward, bringing back that Babylon of old, that make Babylon great again slogan. Trump is really taking steps toward, trying to fulfill that. And it's beautiful because it's taking a step toward prophecy. All right. Going down, because that's what's going to be the camel that break the straw back. That's what's going to rouse a lot of these Israelites up from that dormant state. Let's see. Yeah, you can read the rest of this if you want to. It's on NPR. Has a lot of other articles. All right, but basically, they're taking steps to. It was a step toward. It was a symbolic step toward. It was symbolic toward. Where Babylon is headed as a society. And where the mindset of the elites are. To separate themselves from you useless eaters. Chiefly you Negroes, Latinos, and American Indians. To get you right back on the bottom, to really put you back into the slave class where you belong. And this is moving us and marching us closer to this prophecy. This is Second Esdras, chapter 15, and verse 15. It says, for the sword and the destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. All right, it's going to be race wars. Okay, for there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Okay, we're coming up on that time of great sedition. All right, sedition meaning a concerted attempt to overthrow civil authority. All right, we're coming up on a time of great sedition. Okay, people are getting ready to rebel against Babylon. All right, and in that rebellion, Esau is going to try to bring some form of order, in the form of his miracles. All right, he's going to try to bring some form of peace, like it says in 1 Thessalonians. All right, peace and safety through his means, which is going to be that RFID microchip, which is going to be martial law. All right. We're coming up on a time of all-out chaos. Okay, every empire experiences this this phenomenon. Every empire that ever was always experienced this phenomenon, and that phenomenon is civil unrest. All right, civil unrest, disorder, chaos within the kingdom, chaos within the society. And we're coming up on that time, man. All right, and the Lord spoke about this time. The Lord said he will mix a perverse spirit in the midst of Egypt. And this is exactly what we're seeing. And we're also seeing the division that the Lord spoke about, man. The Lord said that he was coming to divide, man. And this is exactly what's happening. This kingdom is the division is increasing more and more and more. And this is how kingdoms are brought to naught, like the Lord said in Matthew 12. All right, we're watching Satan's kingdom fall like lightning right before our eyes, man. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful, man. And we're starting to see the spirits of Jakes being aroused up like you've seen in the videos that played before this, man. All right. This is a very beautiful time, man. Beautiful time to witness, to be living in your right mind, man, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. And it's only more developments to come from here on out. But with that being said, that's all I have. Lord, when it's edifying unto you elect, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahushai, Bahashim, Rakakwadash, and double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well. Grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. Shalom. Stay up.